Hello and welcome back to the Pilot Roundtable, a Southgate Media Group podcast. I'm Kyle Tremblay, the editor of TVBinges.com, and I am joined as always by TV Binges writer Olivia Richards. Olivia, hello.
Hey.
All right, we are in the summer now, even though it's not even June yet. It's officially summer as far as TV is concerned. And a couple weeks back, you and I talked about Wayward Pines on Fox.
Yes.
And so now we are moving on to the NBC event miniseries, as they're calling it, set in the 1960s and starring David Duchovny, Aquarius. Olivia, before we get into Aquarius, what are your feelings on Charles Manson?
I mean, I think as much as anyone can, feel about a charismatic yet,
Sure.
sociopathic, psychopathic cult leader. So
Yeah. I don't know if there's a wide range of opinions. I'm just feeling it out. So what did you think of this pilot?
I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. Just I kind of have whiplash going on because it's not like any other crime like procedural, in that we're just seeing it from, the perspective of the cops, kind of trying to find this missing girl. Like, we're kind of seeing it from all angles. And then on top of it, we're dealing with kind of the socio-political conflicts of the 1960s. So the show is kind of a lot of things, which I think can work in its, in its benefit, or could be kind of a detriment to it. So I'm not sure how I feel.
Good. I could not have summed it up better myself. That is my feelings as well. I feel overwhelmed, which normally I'm usually pretty good at staying on top of shows, and like even if I don't like a show, I can follow it. There were some scenes early in this pilot, like specifically the diner scene where we're introduced to two characters who we previously have not met. One of them appears to be selling drugs to the other, and there's a protest going on outside, and one gets arrested. Like, that scene, as it was happening, I was just plain lost during. Like, I did not understand what the importance was. I didn't understand where we were. I didn't understand who these characters were. And it might have been intentional, but it was just weird. Like, there were a lot of scenes where I don't think I got the point of them. Which is a strange thing, especially for something that's ostensibly a procedural. Although, like you said, it's definitely aspires to be a lot more than that. Yeah, I don't know how I felt about this either, honestly. It's a weird pilot. I didn't make it through the whole thing, I'll admit right off the top. I got through about a little over an hour before I mean, whose idea was it to have a 2-hour pilot, I guess is my question.
Oh my god, that's the hard thing, because like, you know what, I think I was really okay for the first like 42 minutes, which would have just been the first episode.
Yes.
And I would have been like, okay, but that was the thing, because it felt like one big long episode. So I'm like, I just wanted to like get kind of caught up in what was happening for the first part. And then, we're jumping right into the second part. So like my mind is still in the first episode, and then all of a sudden we're just jumping to what felt like a completely different storyline and all these different things happening, and just it was a little bit much, I think, for the content and how much the show is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It just the 2-hour pilot to me, like that's the length of a movie. And I understand like on TV it's commercials, and so it's really not a full 2 hours. It's probably just slightly less than an hour and a half of content, but you're still sitting there for 2 hours, and it's just a whole lot. And especially the way this was, where like that scene I meant, the diner scene, like it was kind of explained, but after a commercial break, and so I'm left being confused the whole commercial break, and then the next scene kind of explains that the guy was the undercover cop, and then he becomes David Duchovny's partner, yada yada. But it's like this is a show that you have to be engaged with to appreciate. It's not a mindless show, and it's a big ask to have a 2-hour pilot. It's just it's a lot to ask. Before we get too far, we should also mention, speaking of timing, that the entirety of this series is now available on NBC.com. They're trying the Netflix model.
Yes.
Do you feel like this is a bingeable show, or like what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my god. Okay, that's the thing. I'm like, if there is someone in the world who can sit down and just binge this show, like, more power to that person. But oh my god, I feel like this is something that you need to just watch an episode and then take a walk or like hug your family or
Yeah.
something. I can't imagine that you could just sit down and just, you know, as charming as David Duchovny is and as big of a fan as like everyone is of his work and just him in general and how much he's selling the show, this isn't in my mind a very bingeable show.
Me neither. My goodness. Like, who would want to spend a whole day with the show? it's it just it doesn't it's not it makes a lot of efforts not to be pulpy. Like it's trying to be more gritty and real. It's not like a silly take on the 60s, which like I can respect certainly, and that's their prerogative to do it like that. But as far as like being bingeable, you kind of want it to be like fun and campy. It's not that at all. It's very buttoned down, dark, and serious. And I mean, it had light moments in this pilot, but still, it's not a show that you just want to spend a day with. I feel like.
No, and I actually read a really interesting review that the New York Times had done, and they had described the style, like the cinematography, as being like a noir 1940s style.
Yeah.
But then it combines that with like kind of the turbulence of the 1960s. So like a lot of the times when we see the 1960s, they're trying to like kind of play up like the flower power and
Mhm.
like Summer of Love and like all of that, and that's really not the style they're going for in the show. So you get the dark style mixed with all of these just dark themes and then like just sort of adding David Duchovny's character in to kind of give it like a little bit of levity, but this is not a light show by any
I
means.
I like that the introduction of Duke's character was him boxing in what appeared to be a like makeshift gym that he's rigged up in his own house. And then he gets a call and he forgets his keys, so he has to hotwire his own car. It's just really hitting the nail on the head as far as like character exposition goes. Like we're really like between that and his like military style haircut, we got a
Oh,
real quick idea of who David Duchovny is in the show.
I love the scene where he well, I guess because the 1960s, like Miranda rights are just sort
Oh,
of,
I was gonna mention
being
that.
introduced. Because oh my god,
Uh-huh.
that was my favorite scene.
Oh,
And
a big comic Miranda rights set piece, a necessity of all 60s cop shows. Yeah,
uh,
yeah. What? Speaking of the '60s, what did you think of this show's take on the '60s? Because, like you said, you were quoting that review, and I agree. This was a much more menacing '60s than we usually see. It's not a peace love show. There's a lot of underlying sort of menace to this and danger. Um, whether the protests or Charles Manson himself. What did you think of this show's vision and presentation of the 1960s?
I thought it was just interesting because, like, when you think about again, like the way that the 1960s is depicted in a lot of films, it sort of becomes very like comical and stereotypical because most of the time you're focusing on just like the music, which this show does very much focus on.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
so yeah, like as you know, like when you're actually just reading the titles of the episodes, like they're all based around like 1960s songs. But this show, it's not in like a lot of ways that film or television would focus on the 60s as just being like fashion and a lot of like new trends that were starting and just focusing on it as like a pop culture era. This is taking the 60s and focusing on just kind of the turbulence of it and focusing on just kind of the shifting times and sort of again the darker things that were happening that typically like we know that they happen but we don't necessarily like center an entire series on.
Right. Yeah. I agree with all of that. I mean it's certainly an interesting take on the '60s. Um, and I think part of the reason that this show didn't really charm me is that I don't have that, and I don't even know if this is okay to admit on a podcast, but I don't have a lot of affection for 1960s music. Um, like I'm not opposed to it. Like I don't go, oh, what's this garbage? It's just like it doesn't like hearing a Rolling Stones song, like a classic Stones song, or like what else was in this pilot? Jefferson Airplane was here. Like all of that. It's like, oh, that's music from the period. But there's not. I don't like. I feel like a lot of people who like this pilot probably gave the show enormous bonus points for the music selections, and I'm not really giving it any extra credit for that. I feel like it's kind of what you expect from a show set in the 60s is to have 60s music, and they certainly had a lot of it, and some popular songs and some not so popular songs, but I didn't feel like that was like above and beyond. Like, that's, to me, that's not a reason to watch a show. Like, I could just look that music up on Spotify and be good, be
Yeah.
good with it. I don't feel like I need to watch a show for that reason. But I don't know. I mean, what did you like about this pilot? Or were there any elements that drew you in or make you want to keep watching?
Just obviously, besides, like, as we have been saying the whole time, just David Duchovny in
Sure.
general, like, he is sort of what they've been using to market the show. But I was definitely drawn in by the actor portraying Charles Manson, because, there was just something about his performance. Like, each scene that he did, you can just see it, especially, the way that the camera kind of stays in tight with his face. Like, you just see where he goes from, like, charming and charismatic one second to just like manic and doing these unspeakable acts the next. And you just see how these women are being drawn in, and especially, like, focusing on the 16-year-old girl who just, like, is searching for acceptance and love and understanding, and she thinks that she finds it by joining this cult. I thought that that was one of the more compelling storylines in the series.
Yeah, this series kept my attention early on with the Charles Manson stuff, which is, it's going to be tricky, and I think one of the troubles here is that it's such a famous story that everyone knows what the ending is. And so by making this essentially a prequel to a real life event, it's it's hard to generate drama out of that. Like, that's a tough spot to put yourself in as a series when we all know where this is headed, and yet we're starting way out in front of it because we're building to a known point. A series that has navigated this successfully. Now we're getting into our comparison series where we compare the pilot we just watched to something that's on TV. And I'll go first because I thought there were a lot of similarities to what Aquarius is trying to do, to what Hannibal does. A fellow NBC show based on material that exists. In Aquarius's case, it's the real life Charles Manson case. In Hannibal's case, obviously, it's Silence of the Lambs and the books, the Thomas Harris novels. But it's a sort of like what Hannibal succeeds at is being this weird network cable crossover where it's a network drama that has a sort of case of the week element, or at least had one before this most recent season, but also has the performances, the production value, the storytelling ambition of like the best cable dramas. And I feel like, well, that's what Hannibal really pulls off. I feel like that's what Aquarius is trying for. And based on this pilot, I don't think it quite gets there. I don't think the story is alive enough. I don't think it gave me enough of a reason to care. I found myself bored after the first hour. But at least as like a stylistic comparison, I thought a lot of what the show is trying to do is similar to Hannibal. What about you?
Actually, that was the one that definitely
Mhm.
just popped into my head, because, like, when you're looking at this show, it doesn't quite just fit as, like, our standard police procedural, because there's more than that. But yeah, I think Hannibal, even just, the style that the cinematography in the show,
Yes.
like, the darkness of each shot, like, you don't see a lot of light shots, even when, like, it's an outside shot and, there's sunlight. It's always, very, like, dark and kind of,
It
again, like, noir style. So
it
Hannibal,
feels like it's got a filter on those sunlight shots.
absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
know
I think
exactly
that
what you're
that's a
talking about.
good comparison.
Yeah, another NBC show that I thought it was similar to is the short-lived Awake, which was I think 3 seasons ago, a Kyle Killen drama, about a cop who, when he falls asleep, enters into a parallel universe that he is living. Um, so like he cycles between two parallel universes that are different in some key ways. Um, but that was another show that sort of straddled the cable network line, that was more ambitious than a procedural, but still had the bones of procedural. And so NBC has done this before. Like, this isn't uncommon. Um, I agree, it's not a very bingeable show, which is it's an unfortunate first attempt at a Netflix model show for NBC because the ratings were a disaster last night.
Yeah.
It straddled what Hitfix's Dan Feinberg calls the Mulaney line, which is a 1.0 in the demo. and
Oh
then
dear.
it dipped below the Mulaney line in the second hour. So that's that's a
Oh, that show
problem.
now has its own standard.
I know. Well, it's the legacy of Mulaney, right? Like that show would have been forgotten, except that it set this new ratings low, and so now we can compare all shows to it. But yeah, I don't think this one is going to last on TV for very long. It'll probably last forever online, but I don't know. I don't see any real reason to watch it. What is your final verdict, Olivia? Thumbs up or thumbs down on Aquarius?
Yeah, it's not for me. It was an interesting attempt. Again, the marketing and just the plot was sort of a selling point, but no, ultimately for me, it's going to be a thumbs down.
Me too, and I mean we should stress, and I hope it came out that this wasn't a disaster, right? Like this
Oh,
wasn't.
not by no, yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean this wasn't like what was the Americans ripoff? I forgot its name.
Oh my god. Oh, geez, there's so many now.
With Russian spies. Also on NBC, it lasted 2 episodes. It just premiered a couple months ago, but shows how memorable it was. But anyway, that was like a disaster. This wasn't a disaster, and neither was Wayward Pines, by the way. I feel like the shows are kind of similar in they're both trying to be. They're both taking a stab at being more than network dramas, and at least I think in our opinions, they both didn't quite get there. And so this was a thumbs down for me. Not a bitter thumbs down, just a sort of standard like you tried, you failed, thumbs down for me.
You get like a little gold star.
Yeah, a small gold star, A for effort. I certainly, I mean, again, I think David Duchovny. I mean, he's going to be in that X-Files remake here coming up. So we'll even if this gets canceled, David Duchovny will still be in our lives. So
Oh, he's always going to be around.
yeah, of course, forever and ever. So that wraps up this edition of the Pilot Roundtable, a TVBinges.com and Southgate Media Group production. You can listen to all our episodes on iTunes, where you can rate and review us. We would appreciate that. Or you can find us online at southgatemediagroup.com. Follow Olivia on Twitter at RichardsOlivia and me on Twitter at KyleLovesTV. Until next time.